Hello there, and welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, the podcast and YouTube show where usually a father and son sit down and talk about fantasy literature. But I don't see anyone else with me today. This is the first of our formal, regular content being called a Just Jim episode because you just get Jim today. Zach is on assignment. I don't know. He's off doing other things. He has a life. He's got things he's got to get done. So now we'll be spending time uh, every other week or so with an episode just with me. Although I do plan to invite other people to guest with me, and we'll keep this interesting. And I am not alone today. We do have someone with us for this live recording in Discord. Emmeline's here. Yay! Thank you for being here. And even more fun, she has just recently finished the book I'm going to be talking about today. We'll get to that in just a moment. But there are some things that I still want to stick with from the regular format that I do with Zach on all of those other episodes. So I'm not going to ask myself how I'm doing today. That would be a little silly. Although I'm happy to be here and you get that much. But I am going to tell you what I'm drinking because you kind of got to do that. Oh, thank you, Emmeline. She asked how I am. So I'm good. Yes, and glad to be here. But I'm also glad to have a drink. This is a Friday for me. The workday just ended, and I'm hopping on here to do an episode for you. And I created a beverage that goes along with this episode. You're listening to this, so you already know. This is a review of Stormfront, book one of the Dresden Files. And that means it's partly into supernatural fun stuff, but it's also a detective story. So I created the Gumshoe. This is a simple drink with bourbon, rum, and a little triple sec. Yeah, that's nice. I feel like a typical detective would enjoy that. Harry Dresden? Probably not. He'd want some of, as Discord's saying, some of Max Ale. Uh, that guy's got some great brew, but I didn't have any of that in the fridge. I legitimately went and looked. Do I have any beer? Nothing. So I had to get a little more creative. But I'm sure we'll get some of that in for some of these Dresden Files episodes. Before I go on to more stuff, again, just a reminder of what this show is all about. You know, Fantasy for the Ages is a passion of my son and I. We love a lot of books, a lot of the same kinds of books. Fantasy, sci-fi. We're exploring all sorts of new books in that genre. And we get together on here to talk about them and to share our interests with you. We have a main theme going through on the Wheel of Time as we're working our way through those books. We're currently on the fourth book, The Shadow Rising. So if this is the first episode of ours you've caught, be sure to check out all of the Wheel of Time content that we have out there. But then we also jump in with some odds and ends episodes, things like To Read or Not to Read, where we talk about a series that we've enjoyed and why you might enjoy it too or might not and want to stay away. Or we talk about magic systems from different fantasy series. There's a bunch of those out there. And then just some really weird ones. Like there was something recently we showed up when we just started singing. Look for the musical episode. You might get a chuckle out of that one. But today I'm moving into the Dresden Files. So this is something we've not done here before, where I'm actually going to be reviewing a whole book. And I will be putting 17 of these episodes out initially, because there's 17 books in the Dresden Files. And when more come out, I'll review the newer ones too. That'll still be a little while. I'll probably get through all 17 before there's new content to look at, but we'll see. I'm going to be definitely going deep into Stormfront here today. So if you haven't read it, go listen to some of our other content. Go watch some other episodes because this will ruin it for you. And I do not want to ruin this book for anyone. It's marvelous. So much fun. Such a good book. I got into Stormfront as the entry into the Dresden Files because other people had read it and recommended it. Plus, there's a 2012 TV series, just one season, called The Dresden Files. I'm old. I watched that when it was live on TV in 2012. I thought it was brilliant. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Now, it's very different from these books, but it was my first taste of the Dresden Files, and I found enough that when I realized, wait a second, that's based on a book series, there's all these books, I thought I'd check it out. It just took me some time to get to it. So I started reading Stormfront about a year ago, plowed through them all. I don't think it was even a year ago that I read the first one, Stormfront. They were just so good, and I just kept sucking them down. And I think you will too when you give it a try. But before we actually start talking about the book, then, let me remind you, if you enjoy this episode, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. If you're listening to this in the audio format, again, like, give us some stars, give us a rating, and definitely subscribe so you don't miss any of our content. And right now, if you subscribe or if you just want to tell that you've enjoyed an episode, we actually have a special giveaway going on. So anyone who goes onto Apple Podcast and writes a review that's linked to at least a 4-star rating, you can give us a 5. We'll definitely take a 5, but at least a 4. Write a review, and you go into a drawing for one of our frosty mugs with our logo on it. It's a cool thing that you can have a nice beer like you would have got from Mac here in the story, or you can put any beverages you want in it. You can put a good frosty glass of milk. I mean, whatever. But we're going to give 2 of those away. So whoever puts in a review between now and the end of April goes into that drawing, and then we'll May 1st pull a couple of those and ship off some frosty mugs as a thank you for having fun and helping us spread the word of fantasy for the ages. So take a look at that. Last note I have for you today is come join us on Discord. We have a great community. Emmeline is with us here right now in the live recording on Discord, and that's open normally just for our patrons, but once in a while we open it up to more broadly anyone who wants to hop in. We just have some fun interacting together. So if you like anything to do with fantasy literature, sci-fi literature, sharing cat pictures, just interacting with other people who are interested in this sort of stuff, come find us on our Discord. You'll find an invitation to Discord in the link section down below this video, as well as along with the audio podcast. Look in the show notes and come join us on Discord. Give it a try. If you have no idea what Discord is, it won't hurt you. Check it out and see if you like it. Okay, let's get to it. Super excited to finally talk about the Dresden Files, starting here with Book 1, Stormfront. An episode here that Zach may or may not be able to even watch. I mean, he owns the book. In fact, the first few books of the Dresden Files are in his collection now, but I don't believe he's even started reading them yet. Yeah, Emmeline, you're ahead of Zach. Okay, we got to get him going on it, but I can't talk with him about this yet, so I get to talk with all of you. And he's got to get going because he is missing out. These books are freaking awesome. Full disclaimer, as you've probably caught already, I've read all 17 of the current Dresden File novels, as well as a whole bunch of short stories and graphic novels that fill in some gaps in between. If you're going to read through the Dresden Files, definitely look for the short stories because they aren't just extra fluff. They add some pieces that become kind of necessary to understand what's fully going on by the time you get to books 15, 16, and 17. You can find most of the short stories, almost all of them, in 2 collections called Side Jobs and Briefcases. And I'd recommend you find a recommended reading list online, and it'll tell you where to fit in the short stories because you don't want to read them in the wrong spot. Figure out where between which books it would make sense. That's what I did really enrich the reading experience. I'll even try to remember to put in the show notes here a link to a website that I used that was excellent in helping me know where to read each book and where each, the short stories, where they all fit in. It really made it a lot more fun. But that said, that I've read all of this, I'm going to really strive in this episode to be full spoiler only for Stormfront, not giving away things that are to come. Uh, as usual for our podcast, I might hint at some things. I might suggest something's important, but I'm not going to tell you why. I want you to discover it for yourself. So this book, I have to remember to pause to drink on occasion, or I'm going to run hoarse because there's no Zachary to bounce off with here. Okay, this book is a full introduction to the Dresden File universe. The author, Jim Butcher, he's created a beautiful blend of private investigator mystery novel and, the whole detective shtick that's there when you're a PI, and then blending it with the supernatural wizardry stuff. I mean, it's brilliant. But how brilliant? Well, in Stormfront, you don't really fully know yet. You get a taste. It's a really significant taste, and it's entertaining just for its own story. But there's so much more to this. So if you read Stormfront and you like it, that's really good news. You don't have to love it, but if you like it, keep going. Because it's the ground level. It's setting a foundation, but it just keeps building and building and building, and it gets so much better. Honestly, I had people telling me when I first read Stormfront, power through. It's important stuff, but you might not like it that much, but it's worthwhile. Get through it. After I read it, I was like, are you out of your mind? This was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it, which was a really good sign then. So, the Dresden Files. Who are we talking about here? Well, it's named after Harry Dresden. He's our main character, the protagonist, and he does serve as a private investigator. That's his profession. And you think of all the things from TV shows you might be familiar with PIs. He does those things. You've got a missing person, come to Harry. You think somebody might be doing something they shouldn't and you want him to follow up and investigate, he can do that. You've got a lost item, maybe he can track it down. But he has a bit of a twist because not only is he a private investigator, he's a professional wizard. He's the only one listed in the phone book. Now that kind of causes problems because he's a professional wizard private investigator. So what kind of people come to him with business? Well, the people who think he's a crackpot and want to have a little fun. Well, those cases don't tend to pay. The people who just want him to provide a little entertainment, and he doesn't do shows and shtick. He's serious. He's a business guy. I gotta be careful when I say things like serious, because Siri on my computer starts talking to me. That was interesting. A lot of people, the ones who have really serious issues going on that they could use a private investigator for, they don't come to him. Because wizard? Nonsense. They don't believe in that sort of thing. So honestly, when the story opens, Harry is really just scraping by. We don't get the history of how we got into this, how we came up with the brainstorm. I'll be a private investigator and advertise it specifically because of my skills as a wizard. We don't know. You will learn about that eventually. And the short stories help with that. But we don't know that yet. We just know he's doing it and he's not being very successful. He's had jobs. He has an office. But he's having trouble paying necessary things like rent. He's kind of scraping by, and you feel like he's kind of a down on his luck wizard. Nice guy, but not really, maybe listing wizard in the phone book hasn't paid off the way he hoped. However, there is one saving grace, and that is he's got this little shtick that's worked in for him where he gets called on by the Chicago Police Department. I don't know if I mentioned that yet, but this takes place in Chicago. That's Harry's place, his city. And I grew up in Chicago, so that's kind of an extra fun thing for me when I read this. A lot of the destinations and sites, I'm like, I know those places. I've been those places. So a little extra layer for me. Jim Butcher, the author, does not live in Chicago. So that was also kind of humorous. But so he gets some gigs on occasion from the Chicago Police Department. Specifically, they have a department in these novels called Special Investigations, or SI. And that's the department where the weird things that happen that are like completely unsolvable cases get sent. It's led by Lieutenant Karen Murphy. And somewhere in the past, not too long ago from when this first book comes along, she heard about Harry. And she gave him a try on some case that was completely baffling them, brought him in, and this wizard was able to figure out what was going on and help them close the case. Now, of course, Harry says, I have these abilities. Most of the police do not believe this at all. They think he's a bozo. But they can't deny that somehow he's got good instincts, lucky guesses, something. But when they call him in as a consultant, they tend to get pointed in the right direction, and they've been able to solve some really puzzling cases. Karen Murphy has been doing this long enough that she has realized there's something going on with Harry that, is beyond just him being some charlatan. She understands he does know some things, and there are some things most people don't know, which we'll call the supernatural, that he does know about. So she believes there is something here, some extra knowledge. She doesn't fully understand or even believe everything Harry's doing or saying, but she gives him more credit than anyone else does. And since she's in charge of SI, he keeps getting the occasional job. And when you're called in as a consultant for the police department, yes, you get a paycheck. So this has been what's been helping Harry just scrape by, these occasional gigs with SI. And he's building up some credit with Murphy. In this particular story, it starts out where Harry's going to be called in by SI for a rather gruesome case. See, Murphy's got this case that's been tossed to her where a couple of people have died, seemingly murdered, because what happened couldn't have just spontaneously happened. Apparently, a man and a woman, right in the middle of having sex, had their hearts burst out of their bodies. I mean, maybe it was really good sex, but that's not usually how it works. And it was pretty disgusting. And the police are like, oh, we don't know how this can happen. So, special investigations, homicides, like, nope, we don't want this. SI, this is your kind of case. And Murph calls in Harry. And he looks at this, does a little investigating. It doesn't take him very long to figure out that something here is due to black magic. Now, we're going to learn so much about the Harry Dresden wizarding world, but this is one of the first key pieces that gets dropped to us. There's different types of magic, or at least different uses of magic. And what Harry normally does is magic. I don't know if you'd call it good magic or white magic. They don't really emphasize that. But they point out there are some things you can do with magic that are no-nos. They're wrong. and that's black magic. And so what was done here is black. You don't do this. In fact, we do learn here in this book that there's an organization that kind of governs the wizarding world called the White Council. And they even have a police force of sorts called wardens. And the wardens are the ones that keep an eye on and investigate when somebody is perhaps misusing magic. If they are breaking one of the rigid rules and going black. And they come in and they capture such people, and in some cases even act as judge, jury, and executioner. The wardens are bad news if you're doing things you shouldn't be doing with magic. Now, apparently, Harry has something in his past where something took place and he was accused of breaking the rules. Something we come to learn that is actually called the laws of magic. And there are 7 of them we learn later in the book. 7 laws of magic. We don't get all the details here yet. But Harry did something where it was believed he broke one of those laws. And there's only one punishment for breaking a law of magic. You get executed. And a warden is the one who takes care of it. Well, for some reason, Harry is believed to have broken a law, but is given a reprieve. He is not executed. Instead, he's given something kind of like probation. One more chance. But we're watching you. And in particular, we meet one of these wardens, a guy named Donald Morgan, who is keeping a very close eye on Harry Dresden. Super, super close. Because he's sure that Harry skated free from what happened before. Like, he should have been executed. Morgan is positive Harry does not deserve to be sucking air still. So he's just waiting for the opportunity to take care of Harry. Now, that's not real comfortable, going around life with this big bad dude breathing down your neck, watching every move. But Harry's a good guy. He's not going around, breaking the laws of magic. He just knows he has to make sure he doesn't do anything that's kind of gray, because Morgan's going to read the worst in everything. And in fact, we see that come up a few times in this story. Also in this story, Harry gets a client. So he's already got this case that he's now consulting with SI and Karen Murphy. But he also gets a client named Monica Sells. Monica shows up at his office and says, "My husband is missing, and I want you to help me find him. Actually, I want you to find him for me." Her concern, and she admits, "This is why I'm coming to you, is you're a wizard? Well, my husband kind of played around with that too. He was like an amateur wizard, and I think he might have got in over his head." Okay. Harry's already busy with the consulting thing, but he does need money, and she's ready to pay. So he takes this case too. So he's got a consulting gig with something involving black magic, and now he's got a missing husband case. Okay. Well, then in the midst of all this, we get further complication because there's something going on with a drug racket out there now. Let me hold off on the drug racket. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But I do want to point out that what we already learned with the case he's consulting for with SI, he's sure that involves black magic. And if he's going to investigate that, one of the things he figures he needs to do is figure out exactly what was done, exactly how black magic was used. That way he could track down whoever's doing it. Well, that's really flirting with that line of doing black magic. So he's got to kind of be on tiptoes on this case, because if Morgan sees him doing anything related to black magic, he's going to assume the worst and want him executed. Yeah, no tension here. No stress. Easy peasy. As soon as Morgan's aware there's a case of black magic going on in Chicago, he concludes Harry's up to it. So now he's not just watching Harry, he's watching for the proof that Harry is the one doing what Morgan is sure he's already doing, and he only needs the most tenuous amount of proof because, yeah, as Emmeline says in Discord, it's definitely got to be Harry's fault. Morgan is the kind of guy, execute first, ask questions never. This just makes everything more complicated. And that's a good element for this story because everything seems to make things more complicated for Harry. So let's get complicated level number one. Harry gets invited into a very fancy car. And invited is a very gentle term because this big muscle bound guy named Hendrix says, "Get in the car." Harry doesn't have much choice. He gets into the car and we meet Gentleman John Marcone, the chief crime boss of Chicago. It turns out that the man of the couple that heartburst worked for Marcone. And Marcone tells Harry that he'd very much appreciate, perhaps as a professional favor, if Harry would back off. Don't investigate this case for the police department, implying he'll take care of it. Marcone, he'll have this covered. There's no need for you. Harry basically tells him to beep off, which I'm like, seriously? You're sitting down in front of the top mobster in Chicago and you tell him to take a flying leap? Not how I would play the situation. But then again, I can't do magic, so Harry seems to have this thing about bad guys and not being able to keep his mouth shut. He says what he thinks. He's rather flippant. Thankfully, he is allowed to get out of the car. But that was not a good interaction. Chances are there's going to be more going on between Harry and Marcone. Then let's add to it that as he continues to investigate, okay, first he's got the guy he knows worked for Marcone. What about the woman? Well, turns out she was a professional. A professional escort. She was a working woman, but very high class. Now, in these detective novels, you get all sorts of working women, from the sleazy brothels to the very high priced escorts. And I mean, that happens in these kinds of stories. Well, in this particular case, this is a very high level establishment that this woman was connected with. But there's a twist. See, it's run by a madam named Bianca. She's not just the head of an escort service. She's the vampire who's the head of an escort service. Okay, that's not something we see every day. I guess technical term would be a vampiress. She looks like a person. She looks like a beautiful person, but she's not. Underneath, and when Harry goes to visit her as part of his investigating, he's aware that she's a vampire. But he's not met her before. He just knows this and knows he really should be staying out of her way, but he's following where the evidence takes him. And things do not go well in their interaction, and magic becomes involved. And we learn that Bianca, while looking human, actually is a terrible, ugly bugger of a monster underneath human skin, which gets ripped off in the magic Harry uses to defend himself. And she didn't particularly care for that. So he gets out of Bianca's place, but he's definitely made an enemy. We'll probably want to keep an eye on that. Okay, I have to pay attention. Ooh, that is a great meme. I got to pay attention to Discord. Evelyn dropped a good one. There's no way I could do it justice explaining. Come join us on Discord sometime and see the fun we have over there. I don't even know how you found that one, but it's pretty good for Bianca. All right, so he's already gone crossways with John Marcone, the chief mobster of the town, and now he's got Bianca, a high-powered vampire, out to get him too. Now let's make it extra complicated by talking about that illicit drug that I mentioned earlier. It's something called 3-eye. Now, drugs. Okay, drugs happen in detective novels all the time. Crime stories. Drugs. Makes sense. This one, however, is unique and fits in the Dresden universe because it doesn't just get someone high. It gives them temporarily a special wizard ability called the sight. Now, normally, this special magical vision is only open to wizards. What it allows a wizard to do is to see through anything supernatural and to see how things really are. So, for instance, using the sight, and he looks at Bianca, he sees the ugly monster, not the beautiful woman. That's how the sight would work. If something has been hidden or shielded by spells, by magic, using the sight, he'd see right through it. No problem. Looking at a person, he gets to see who they really are, not who they're pretending to be. You can't hide things from the sight. So, someone taking this drug, 3-eye, gets this extra sight for a while. Now, the bad news is the sight is nothing to mess around with because normal people should not be able to see the supernatural world. They can't handle it. Literally, that can drive them insane. Then add to it that when you see something with the sight, it's burned into your brain. It never fades. It never gets forgotten. Perfect memory, perfect recall. Now, if you see something absolutely horrific from the supernatural while on this drug and can never forget it, yeah, you're la la for Cocoa Puffs now. There's some bouncing rubber room for you. You will not recover from this. So this is very dangerous. Harry is aware of how dangerous the sight can be even for him. There are things he might see that he would really struggle with and never be able to forget. So he uses it very sparingly, but you got people buying these pills and popping this stuff like it's fun, and it's having some devastating effects. So this is an extra thing he has to try to figure out now because this is related to the wizarding world. And he's the wizard in Chicago. Uh, Maybe we can see about trying to get this drug to go away. Now, this would be a time for me also to mention a key element we learn about the sight that I'll tell you will continue to be relevant as you move through the Dresden Files. And that's that you can use the sight for something special called a soul gaze, where a wizard looks directly into the eyes of a person with the sight, and it kind of, for a wizard, just kind of happens then automatically that the sight kicks in when they look someone in the eye, and they can see straight to the core of who a person is. They learn what has made them who they are. Again, no deception works. They don't see who you're pretending to be. They see you at your core, whether you're rotten or deeply good, they're going to know it. And at the same time, they see you in the same way. And you will never forget what you see. Again, that's a rule of the sight. So when you soul gaze someone, you're going to see them so deeply, so personally, and never forget it. That's something that could be kind of tricky and messy. So wizards, and we see this with Harry, they in general don't make eye contact with people. They don't want to soul gaze. They will use it as a tool. Harry will use it as a tool when it's necessary and very intentional, but you don't want to accidentally soul gaze someone. Okay, those are complicating factors amidst which the rest of this story takes place. Now, the Dresden Files are episodic. That is to say, each book comes in with a quick hitting story that advances the overarching plot of the entire series. Each book, until the last two books, 16 and 17, uh, have a self contained story. So you can read that book and it ends and it wraps up. It makes sense. But it's adding layer upon layer upon layer of the future stories. So, what's actually more important than the main plot of Stormfront is all the people and relationships that are introduced as Butcher helps us meet the Dresden universe. So I'm going to real quick wrap up the story and then talk about a lot of those cool things. So what Harry figures out in all of this is that Victor Sells, the missing husband, is actually a black sorcerer who's bursting people's hearts out of their chests and is also the mastermind behind 3i, the drug that's out there on the street. He's scum. And he's powering his black magic through sex, orgies, and using thunderstorms. Okay. Harry does manage to defeat Victor after figuring all this out. He doesn't kill Victor, but Victor does die. Harry's actions lead directly to Victor dying, but he doesn't kill him. And that's kind of important because one of the things you're not supposed to do is kill people with magic. That's a law. And that's good because as he gets himself out of this mess that the whole confrontation with Victor turns into, Morgan shows up on the scene, the warden, and he actually witnesses how Harry managed to resolve things without breaking a law of magic, and therefore, god dang it, he can't kill Harry. He actually has to acknowledge, all right, I see you weren't the one behind all this, even though I was sure you were. It was someone else. You'll probably mess up some other time and I'll get you then. But for now, okay, I'll leave you alone. You've earned a slight reprieve. It's all very entertaining. I recommend reading the book to fully appreciate it. But now, what I really want to get into is these details that come out of this particular episode of the Dresden Files that will have impact through the rest of the series. Now, I've not listened to the audiobooks. I've only read these. Emmeline in Discord listened to the audiobook, and I know a lot of people have really enjoyed the audiobooks. I've heard the first one, Stormfront, has some sound quality issues at times that are a little wonky, and the reader, the performer, was kind of finding his way in this first book. That's what I hear. But I hear by book 2, he's hit his groove, and that the audiobooks are spectacular. So if you liked how he performed in book 1, you're going to love the rest. And if you were a little questionable with book 1, keep going because it gets really, really good moving forward. James Marsters is the person who does the audiobook. If you're a fan like me of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, he was Spike. Yep, there it is in Discord. Dropped a meme of him, and I really enjoyed him in that. But he apparently is just a star reading these books. Quite spectacular. But since I've not listened to those, my pronunciations of things are purely what makes sense to me from reading the book. So please don't crucify me if you heard it said differently in the book. All right, first I want to talk about the local pub, McAnally's or McAnally's. I don't know. McAnally's is how I say it. And humorously, the proprietor is named Mac. Okay, Emmeline's telling me McAnally's. McAnally's. I can live with that. Let's try McAnally's. Anyways, McAnally's is a special kind of pub right there in Chicago. It's one of these, like Cheers. If you watched the show Cheers back in the day, where you walk down some stairs to go into the pub. But this pub is a freaky, weird little place because it's specifically designed with columns and furniture in ways that kind of break up the flow of magic. And therefore, people who are of the supernatural crowd, like wizards, know this is a place they can go to where they're likely to not be attacked. It's likely a safe space. And even people who might accidentally have trouble with magic, it probably won't hurt you here. So uh, it becomes the local watering hole of the supernatural crowd. And we find that Harry and Mac, kind of friends. They're at least friendly. When Harry shows up at McAnally's, gotta get used to saying it that way now. He's welcomed. Mac is not a real vivacious, energetic guy, but kind of like, huh, and he's welcomed in. And Mac has good brew. The drinks are spectacular, and people would come just for that. So that's one destination, is very cool. Another locale that we don't learn a lot about in this book, but it's going to come back and you'll learn more. It's called the Never Never. Now, in the briefest of terms, the Never Never is another realm of existence that is like parallel to ours. It's the supernatural world. It exists alongside the real world, but just outside of it. And many of the supernatural creatures that we can encounter in the real world come from the Never Never. They come in, they go out. Again, we're going to learn lots more about that, but Harry is familiar with the Never Never. He has mentioned it to Lieutenant Murphy. She doesn't totally understand, maybe not even sure she believes about this Never Never thing, but in their conversation, she's like trying to understand and remember the things that he teaches her. Then we get to Susan Rodriguez. I love this character, and there's a lot to love about Susan. She's a reporter, but she works for a paper, a rag called The Arcane. Think National Enquirer. It's not a highly distinguished paper. It's the kind that, splashes on the front page. Woman gives birth to lizard boy. Those kinds of articles. But she's the one who does the supernatural wizarding type of beat. She's always hunting down stories that have to do with magic or the supernatural creatures. And she writes regularly for this paper. And she's figured out Harry's got connections. Through Harry, there are things that she can learn about. Now, Harry doesn't want to tell her a lot about the supernatural world because she then writes it all. And part of how the supernatural world coexists with the real world is that the real world doesn't believe any of that stuff. And so they get along just fine. In fact, Harry's kind of flirting with that by advertising that he's a wizard. But that kind of works because most people don't believe him. So he can be honest and not get in trouble. Well, Susan, she wants to know Harry more, partly to get stories out of him, get things she can use professionally, but also we get the impression she may be after Harry for more natural, biological reasons. They got a thing going on. And she is described as a character who, in simple layman's terms, is hot. And Harry has noticed that too. So at one point in the story, he actually does agree to take her out on a date, take her out to dinner. And then just the chaos of these cases he's involved with kind of get him caught up in things. And when she shows up at his house, dressed to the nines, ready for this date, he's completely forgotten. And it leads to a hilarious scene. The best way, a scene involving a demon, a magic circle that's keeping them safe from the demon, and Susan, who is now under the influence of a love potion, trying to slam him to the ground so they can get busy. And part of Harry would love to do nothing more, and the other part of Harry realizes that, and I haven't mentioned this before, he's extremely tall. So to get down on the ground, he will break the circle. There's no way to get down on the ground with her without breaking this magic circle and being a snack for a demon that's after them. It's a very, very funny scene. I'm not going to tell you more about it. Read the book, fully enjoy that. All right, more stuff. We learn wizards and technology don't go along. They don't get along at all. The high-tech world breaks down in the presence of magic. So you don't find Harry Dresden with a cell phone. You find him using a phone and hoping the connection will last long enough and be audible enough to communicate. Things go on the fritz. So he shows up at the police station. Murphy is going to be like, yo, stay over there. Do not come near my computer. I do not want to replace it again, kind of thing. Light bulbs pop in his place. So at his home, he has no usage for electricity. That stuff would never regularly work. He has a very old style basement apartment. We're going old school for heat, for light, a lot of candles. Kind of fits the magic scene, right? Now, this also ties into his vehicle. Harry drives a old, beat up Volkswagen Bug that he calls the Blue Beetle. Once upon a time, it was blue. But through the various cases he's had, the car has taken a beating. Now, he has a mechanic, Mike, who is a wonder with this car. So it doesn't seem to matter how damaged, smashed up, broken down, or just fried again magically that his car becomes, Mike can get it going again. So as we meet him in the story, he's got this piecemealed car with different components of different colors, whatever Mike was able to find, but it still runs, and he still calls it the Blue Beetle because back in the day, it was completely blue. I want to give a shout out to Mr. This is another character we meet. It's just Harry's cat. But really, Harry is Mr.'s pet. This cat is like the size of a bobcat. Huge, massive creature that happens to live in Harry's home. And we'll have interactions with Mr. along the way multiple times, but lots of fun to see this cat that will come up to Harry, "You're home," and practically knock him over just by rubbing up against his legs. We have another person with us in Discord. Welcome. Glad you're here. We're having some fun. All right. I want to introduce the character Toot. Toot is a little fairy creature, like a pixie, that Harry summons. Now, you can magically summon creatures from the fairy world, from the fae world. And when they're summoned, they have to do what you want, or you don't free them. So Harry does that and summons Toot. And it's obvious from the interaction in this book that Harry has done this before. Toot is not the smartest of creatures, very limited in its understanding and perception of things, but also smart enough to be ticked off that Harry summons him again. And yet, Harry's able to manipulate Toot to do what he wants for him. And the biggest thing he uses Toot for is to get information. Near the end of this interaction with Toot, we come to understand that there's a different kind of magic that Harry's going to be able to use moving forward. See, apparently Toot likes pizza. Pay attention to that. That's going to have some fun payoffs down the road. Toot and pizza. All right, another one I'll get to is we got to talk about Bob. Bob, you might be able to reference as Harry's sidekick. Bob is a spirit of intellect that lives inside a skull in Harry's lab, or down in his sub-basement. So it's really a skull, and this spirit that stays inside the skull and has to be in the skull unless Harry lets it out. So Harry controls this spirit of intellect. Now, what's the good of a spirit of intellect? Well, it's basically an encyclopedia of magic. So when Harry wants to know things, like in this book, when he wants to make some potions, Bob's the recipe book. Bob tells him just what to do. So if you read between the lines, you get to understand that Harry may be more capable of magic than he, by sheer experience and study, would naturally have been. Simply because he's got Bob. We don't know how he got Bob. We don't know all the history of Bob. We do know Bob's a bit of a pervert. He's got a thing for the women. And we get some humor out of that and that engagement and relationship between Harry and Bob there. We'll see Bob in more books. We'll see Bob's perverted nature in more books. So enjoy that. I definitely like the character Bob. We get mention of something from Harry's past in a character referenced as He Who Walks Behind. Now, we don't learn a lot about this, but I wanted to point this one out because it is a very significant thing to remember. Something happened in the past where He Who Walks Behind was an enemy of Harry, and Harry beat him. That's about all we get in this story. But we're going to know more eventually. So that's just one to hang on to. Now let's talk about magic. Okay, we learned some things about magic. Okay, the rules of magic, the way Harry's able to use it. We're going to learn a lot more, but in this first book, we get a few key things introduced. One is the power of the threshold. A home has some natural protection from the supernatural world because it has a threshold. Basically, just by being a home, magical creatures cannot easily enter. Harry's house is some protection for him then from the supernatural things that might otherwise want to get him. Now, it doesn't mean supernatural things can't get in someone's home, but a threshold causes some resistance. And that's something that does play in sometimes in this book and will continue to be something that has an impact throughout the series. So remember that the threshold has power. Other things about magic. What do we learn from Harry? Well, first of all, he casts spells. So this is a kind of magic that you cast spells. He does this by using fake words. I don't know if you all caught that, but it sounds like he's saying Latin. Not really. He's saying like faux Latin. Okay, they're kind of Latinish. There might be pieces of things he's saying, but they're not Latin. We'll learn more about the words he uses, but you catch, as you read through the book, that certain Latin phrases, fake Latin phrases, do certain things. But not everyone who uses magic will do magic the same way Harry does. These are his magic words to do his magic things. He also, when he's using magic, he's really working with two different kinds of things. He's using force and he's using elements. So we see him do things with fire, for example. That's an elemental magic. We see him pull something across the room. That's a force magic, okay? And those are the primary types of magic we're going to see him use. And he uses a magic staff. Now, he doesn't have to have a staff to do magic. It's not like Gandalf and my staff, no. But the staff does help him channel his magic. He's also got a blasting rod. Okay, so we've got a magic staff and a rod. Rod is shorter, staff is longer. They both serve the same kind of purpose. They allow him to channel his abilities. So he might be able to do, shoot fire at something, but it's going to come out as lots of flame. Or he can shoot a beam of fire. Well, that he's going to need his blasting rod for, to concentrate the power, to have that much focus and control. So as Harry, over time, has learned the different kinds of things, the spells he can create, the things he can do with his tools, they all have to stay within the realm of what's allowed with magic. He's got to avoid breaking the laws because once you go black, you never go back, apparently. That things get really bad. You can't dip into black magic and then, oh, I'll never do that again. So that's why Warden Morgan is keeping an eye on him. He believes Harry is a black magic practitioner who got away with it, and therefore he'll do more. He just has to keep watching. We're going to learn a lot more about magic as we move through the series. That's all I'm going to say because it was hard not to say too much. You only get this little snapshot in Stormfront. It's going to get bigger and better. But what's really important, what I really want to emphasize is everything we learned in Stormfront, Jim Butcher is going to build on top of. This was all essential foundational knowledge. Nothing you learned here is going to be wrong later. It's just going to be extended and expanded. I mean, there are certainly other books I've read where things that are in the first book just kind of disappear. Wheel of Time, Moraine has a staff in the first book and we never see it again. Things like that. Not really with Dresden Files. Now, there are people who will tell you I'm wrong there. There are certain things that are said a certain way or emphasized in the first book that are never done the same again. I disagree. I'm just saying he expands on these so that some of the stuff just isn't as relevant anymore. But nothing that I find in Stormfront becomes wrong later, where let's just forget I ever wrote that. No, that's not how it works. It's a really well done story. Now, I alluded to this earlier, that some people do claim the first two, maybe even the first three books in the Dresden Files are kind of slow. That they lack the quality of some of the later books, that they just aren't as good. And I just want to say, have those people read the same books I have? Because I can't disagree strongly enough. You've heard me saying it throughout this episode. There's so much introduced in this book, and none of it was fluff. It's all stuff that Jim Butcher's going to use later on throughout the series in such amazing ways. And there are things you've learned in this book that won't pay off for books down the road, and there's stuff that's going to be part of every book as you move forward. But it was all needed. It was all necessary. So I never felt Stormfront was in any way dull or a waste of my time. It's essential. Humorously, Jim Butcher has gone on the record and said he wrote this story originally for a college class, and the professor said, yeah, this is trash. This will never go anywhere. The professor was wrong. It certainly has gone somewhere now. Admittedly, this book doesn't move as fast as some of the later ones will, because there is a lot to introduce. I mean, that's absolutely necessary in the first book of a series. And there will be parts of book 2 and book 3 that share that element, that will be introduced to key elements of the Dresden Files for the first time. So he has to be a little more detailed and go a little slower, but it's all worthwhile. It's all so great. I saw something Emmeline just dropped in Discord about Harry having the worst 4 days in this book. Get used to that. Jim Butcher is not kind to Harry Dresden. He does take such a beating, my goodness. But he comes through. He came through in this story. So that's fun. One other element of these books that it's definitely true in Stormfront and will continue to grow stronger through this series is humor. I find Jim Butcher's way of writing these stories hilarious. I laugh out loud as I go through these books. And I don't usually do that. I'll smile at stuff, but no. As I was reading these books, my wife would be sitting in the room next to me and I just burst out loud laughing. And she's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I can't even explain. You'd have to be reading to get it. But I swear Butcher's sense of humor channels mine. I mean, I don't know if he has enough similar backgrounds to what my experiences were, but I get it. I get all of the jokes, all of the puns, all of the hints. It's just so funny. So if you don't find it as funny as I do, you're apparently not me, and that's fair. But wow, I was really in sync with Jim Butcher. So that makes this so much better for me. So if you've just started reading these books, keep plugging along. I'll keep providing these episodes periodically, working through all 17 books. I suppose we'll probably have to dabble into the short stories at some point too, because they do fill in things, like I said. I'll try again to remember to drop in that link to where you can find a good reading guide for the Dresden Files and know where to fit those short stories in. They were so good, the whole series. And I'm glad if you're listening to this, you probably enjoyed Stormfront. Glad you did. There's better to come. But that's what we'll wrap this up for now. I want to remind everybody, come join us on Discord, like I said at the beginning. And let me drop my outro video here and see if that works. There it is. So I want to thank you for watching. Again, remind you, like and subscribe. Show us some love with the reviews and star ratings. Find us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all cool places. Definitely come find us on Discord. We're a fun community. We want to enjoy getting to know you too and sharing all the fun. And if you really like stuff, find us on Patreon. Support us and get some extra benefits. That's where people come with us in our live recordings all the time. All right. Thanks for being here. We'll talk to you next time.